The first shot was bright enough to look like sunrise. It ripped across the pale morning, a streak of fire against the washed-out sky, then vanished into the wall of blue-white rock above the convoy. A heartbeat later, the heavy machine gun that fired it walked its line down, chewing through the lead truck's engine block, spraying black metal, steam, and fragments across the narrow mountain road. The valley seemed to wake up all at once. Tracers slashed through the cold air, neon scar lines carving between the tall pines clinging to the slopes. The sharp crack of rifles echoed off the cliffs, doubled and redoubled, until it sounded like there were 100 shooters on every side. Snow kicked up in hard little bursts wherever rounds bit into it, puffs of white exploding and then settling again as dark stains spread underneath. Petty Officer Mason hit the ground hard enough to knock the breath out of him. His boots skidded on the icy crust as he dove behind what had been a local escort vehicle. An old blue pickup that now lay on its side, windows blown out, the cab burning hot and constant. Heat washed his right side. His left side was inches from the road's edge, where the asphalt broke off into open air and a long, gray drop into a shadowed ravine. Contact front, contact left, contact right, someone shouted over the net, the words coming out in a ragged scream. Mason's exhale fogged his visor in a white burst. The air was so cold it burned in his lungs. Rounds snapped off the frozen road a foot from his boots, sparking and shrieking away into the rock wall. Bits of ice and gravel hammered his gear, rattled off his helmet like hailstones. He slammed his gloved hand onto the radio on his chest. "Razor 2 to Razor Actual," he shouted, voice raw. "We're in the X. Repeat, we are in the X. Say position." Static. Underneath the hiss, he heard fragments of other voices fighting to get through. "Alpha's hit. I need a corpsman up front. Engine's gone. We're stuck. We're—" A high, almost electronic whine laced through the static, rising and falling like feedback. "Actual, say again." Mason yelled. "We need a plan down here." "Who's running this fight?" "Nothing. Just the same warped hiss, the same sense that someone, somewhere was stepping on their long-range comms with something stronger." The road was a nightmare, painted across white. Bodies in broken winter camo clustered around stopped vehicles like dropped ragdolls. One Allied soldier lay half out of the second truck, parka hood bright against the snow, blood blooming beneath him in a slow, spreading halo. The intel vehicle, a squat, heavily armored box near the middle of the line, sat wedged behind the burning lead truck, windshield crazed, side panels peppered with fresh impact scars, rear doors still closed. Behind them, the only way out of the pass was gone. A third vehicle had tried to reverse and jackknife it on the ice, slewing sideways until its bumper hit the rock wall. It was stuck at a perfect angle to trap the rest of the convoy. Smoke coiled from its hood, thin and bitter against the crisp air. The gun truck that should have been saving them was silent. It hunkered near the center of the column, heavy weapons still pointed up, barrel smoking gently. Its gunner was slumped on the pintle, harness twisted. The assistant gunner lay half under the truck, trying to drag himself to cover while rounds ripped through the snow a hand's breadth away, sending up fountains of white. "Mason," someone yelled from somewhere behind him. "We got to get that gun back up." He risked a glance past the edge of the burning pickup. The world beyond was a strobe of muzzle flashes and drifting snow. The slopes weren't just steep. They were built by time and geology for murder. Terraces of rock and sparse pines cut into the mountain like steps, each one offering cover and a view of the road below. Muzzle flashes flickered there now, behind trunks and boulders, orange and yellow flaring through thin veils of blowing powder. The enemy had the heights, the angles, and the element of timing. "Where are they even?" Mason started, then ducked as a burst of heavy rounds shredded the truck's rear window, showering him with glittering safety glass. On the net, things were worse. "Viper 1's taken three down. Razor 3, my driver's hit. I can't move, we're blocked in. Get that uplink online, call for her." I said, "Get smoke out, we gotta conceal this." There was no single voice cutting through, just an avalanche of competing orders and rising panic. Then an explosion punched the road behind the intel truck. The world turned gray. Snow, dirt, and shattered rock billowed upward in a solid column, then fell in a choking curtain. The blast thumped through Mason's ribs, knocked his helmet forward, turned the constant roar into underwater muffling for a heartbeat. In that strangled quiet, something else slipped through. A slow inhale. Not his. Not anyone's around him. A sound so measured it felt wrong against the chaos. A breath drawn in, held, and let out with a calm only training or something colder could buy. On the far slope, up where the snow clung in ragged patches to the rock, something moved. He didn't see a person, just fragments. A gloved hand steady on the stock of a long rifle, guiding it deeper behind a jagged outcrop. A magazine, pale against dark metal, seated with a firm, practiced tap-tug-tap. The faint glint of curved glass tucked into shadow, just catching a shard of the washed-out sun. Scope, not binoculars. Another breath, ghosting gray around the muzzle. Then the valley snapped back to full volume. On the left ridge, an enemy machine gun poured fire into the road, its muzzle buried in a sandbagged nest hacked into the snow. Rounds raked across the wrecks, chewing up the cliff above Mason's head, keeping anyone from moving more than inches at a time. Its rhythm was a metronome of death, steady, relentless. A single shot cut through it. It wasn't louder, didn't echo more than any other. Mason found it because he was listening for it now, his mind clinging to the memory of that measured breath. The machine gun stopped mid-burst. Up on the ridge, the faint silhouette behind the weapon jerked backward, then dropped out of sight. The barrel sagged. The assistant gunner reached for the grip, then flung himself flat instead as the convoy's returning fire, weak and scattered though it was, finally bit into the now empty position. The effects were immediate. The volume of fire on the left dipped just enough for one of the Allied soldiers to skid out on hands and knees, grab the wounded man hanging from the second truck, and drag him back behind the wheel well. Just enough for the corpsman to sprint through churned-up snow and ice to the middle of the road without getting cut in half. Mason blinked away, melting frost from his lashes. What did he breathe? A second sharp crack came a few seconds later. Over on the right, an RPG gunner had crawled up behind a boulder and shouldered his launcher. The tube's front end just poked past the stone, aimed straight at the jam gun truck. His buddy held a spare rocket, watching the road. Their breaths came in heavy puffs in the cold air. The gunner leaned out, starting to line up his shot. He snapped sideways as if jerked by an invisible line, the round catching him high in the chest. The launcher clattered down into the snow. The rocket slid free, rolled in a lazy arc, and came to rest harmlessly against a drift. "Who the hell is that?" A voice muttered, close enough that Mason wasn't sure if it was on the net or right behind him. The shots weren't wild. They weren't desperate. They were surgical. Someone up on the ridge, someone who wasn't part of the chaos below, was deciding which enemy positions lived and which died. The radio still sounded like a strangled animal. "Lost the sat link. I can't reach higher. It's just some kind of jammer." The high whine surged and dipped in Mason's ear. It wasn't random. It pulsed like a heartbeat, like a machine cycling through a pattern. Whoever had planned this ambush hadn't just set up guns. They'd brought something to cut the convoy off from the world. They'd walked into a trap that was more than just bullets. But the trap hadn't accounted for the calm breath on the cliff. Shot 3 took out a rifle team that had been working the far side of the pass, their muzzle flashes barely visible through a stand of pines. Shot 4 snapped the spine of suppressing fire, pinning the corpsman on his belly. With each trigger pull, pockets of space open on the road, small at first, then wider as the attackers tried to figure out what invisible hand was swatting their best positions flat. The net stuttered as short-range radios tried to pick up what the long-range systems had dropped. "Whoever's up top, keep doing that," someone panted. "Keep, just keep." Mason tilted his helmet back against the lip of the truck's undercarriage and squinted up at the ridge. He saw only snow and rock and pine, all of it half lost in the white glare of the overcast morning. Then the wind shifted, pushing aside a veil of spindrift clinging to a ledge, and for a second he caught it again. The glimmer of curved glass, the line of a barrel, The outline of a prone figure blended into the stone. The next shot didn't come right away. The shooting on the slopes grew more erratic. Whoever was up there, cutting key pieces out of the ambush, had made the enemy nervous enough to start shifting position. Mason could feel it in the pattern of impacts. The gunfire wasn't smooth anymore. It probed, tested, tried angles, and then abandoned them. He realized with a jolt that he was holding his breath, waiting for that clean crack. It came, and this time it came with a voice. The interference on his radio dipped, warbled. For a heartbeat, there was an opening like a gap in a curtain. Through it, a new voice slid in, thin but clear, like a line scored with a knife through all the noise. Low. Female. Flat in a way that wasn't bored. It was controlled. Razor elements. This is Sierra 3, the voice said. I have eyes on multiple shooters and your jammer. You will shift your smoke to grid 07, marked with red. Break. A pause, brief, broken by the distant echo of another shot. Maybe hers. You will move your wounded behind the intel truck and reman that gun. On my next call, you will push vehicles forward 10 meters. Do not bunch up at the choke. Acknowledge. Nobody asked who she was. For the first time since the ambush started, the net stilled. The competing voices dropped. The sudden absence of shouting was almost as loud as the gunfire. Mason found his mouth moving before his brain caught up. Razor 2 copies, he said. Sierra 3, say again grid. 07. Flash smoke now. No stress. No wasted words. And somebody kicked that big gun awake. Behind him, a SEAL barked at the assistant gunner to get clear. Another operator vaulted over a snow hedge, slid under the gun truck, and came up with one hand on the mount, the other on the limp gunner's harness. Mason saw the motion out of the corner of his eye while he fumbled for a smoke grenade, yanked the pin with his teeth, and lobbed it toward the point Sierra had called. The canister skittered across the ice, came to rest against a buried rock, and began to pour thick red smoke into the cold air. Mark on red, the calm voice said into his ear. Stand by. Mason pressed his cheek to the ice-cold road and listened. Somewhere above, the glint of glass steadied again. The story of how she got there, how she ended up on that ridge, in that snow, with their lives and the steady spread of her crosshairs, had started 12 hours earlier, under the same sky and a different kind of cold. The sun hadn't known what to do with the place yet when the briefing started. It hung low and weak over the forward operating base, spilling thin light across the frost-crusted gravel and the faded plywood buildings. Breath steamed from every mouth. The airfield smelled like fuel and dust and the ghost of last night's coffee. Inside the cramped briefing room, a space heater rattled in the corner, fighting a losing battle against the draft that slipped through the door every time someone entered. A map of the valley was pinned to the board at the front, satellite imagery overlaid with colored grease pencil lines and printed grids. The mountain pass they were headed to bent across it like a crooked finger. Route is simple, the briefer said, a captain from the intel cell. He was wrapped in a fleece that didn't fit right, sleeves bunched up around his wrists. Convoy leaves here at 06, reaches the listening site by 1000, offloads, and returns along the same path tomorrow. Low visibility profile. He tapped the map where the road squeezed through the pass. No gunship escort, he went on. No heavy armor. We're keeping this looking routine to avoid drawing attention. Locals see too much kit, they start talking. We want quiet. At the back of the room, leaning against the wall near the door, she frowned almost imperceptibly. She had come in alone and taken up a position where she could see everyone without anyone needing to see her. Standard winter camouflage jacket, zip halfway, collar turned up, hair braided close and tight at the base of her neck. The soft case for her long rifle rested upright at her left knee, gloved hand hooked around the strap. In her right hand, a small, battered notebook lay open, pen tucked into the binding. Staff Sergeant Maya Rios, attached sniper. The senior SEAL in the room, Lieutenant Tex Harrigan, though no one called him that, sprawled in a chair near the front like he'd been poured there and left to cool. His beanie was pulled down just enough to shadow his eyes. He watched the captain talk, but his gaze kept drifting to the map, tracking the lines of the road, the contours of the hills. The intel vehicle, the captain continued, pointing a small square symbol near the middle of the route, is your priority. It's carrying the upgraded listening package for Site Bravo. We lose that, and we go dark on half this sector's enemy comms. Everyone clear on that? Murmurs, nods. Questions? Most of them were the usual. Fuel. Contact points with local forces. Rules of engagement along the pass. Harrigan listened with half an ear, arms folded, boot tapping in a regular rhythm. Maya listened with all of hers, eyes flicking between the map and the satellite photos, not to the brief but to what it left out. Is this latest imagery? She asked when there was a pause. The captain looked over, noticing her properly for the first time. 2 weeks old, he said. Newest we've got with this resolution. She nodded slowly, pen scratching her notebook. And we're expecting what, exactly? Harrigan asked, finally. Kids with rifles, bored checkpoint warriors, what? We've had reports of small arms harassment in the area, the captain said. Nothing sustained. We believe the enemy still thinks the old listening site is offline. This is a resupply, not a combat patrol. Harrigan's mouth pulled into a skeptical half-grin. Believes, he echoed. Right. The captain chose not to hear the tone. Any more questions? He asked. There were a few small ones. Nothing that changed the shape of the red line on the map. When the briefing broke, chairs scraped back and bodies moved toward the door. Gloves were pulled on fully. Hats were tugged low. A low buzz of talk filled the narrow hallway outside. Men and women shouldering rucks and weapons, joking about the cold and the boredom of convoy duty. Out on the tarmac, the vehicles sat in a neat line, exhaust ghosting in thin plumes as engines idled. Snow clung to the shadows under their frames. The mountains towered beyond the perimeter fence, the pass just a dark notch between them. Maya crossed the gravel at an unhurried pace, rifle case in one hand, notebook tucked inside her jacket. She'd already been into the small tent where the map printer lived, already printed a larger version of the valley, already circled not just the road, but the shapes of the ridges around it. She passed Harrigan as he stood beside the turret of the gun truck, talking to his team. The men around him laughed at something he'd said, shoulders loosening, the easy swagger of people who'd been doing this long enough to have their own rhythm. He turned his head just enough to catch sight of her name tape when she stopped at the rear bumper of the intel truck, checking tie-downs on a crate. He squinted. You are Shooter? He called. She looked up, meeting his eyes. Dark, unreadable. Yes, sir. He stepped away from the turret, boots crunching on frozen gravel, and wandered over with his hands in his pockets, as if this were a coffee line and not a pre-combat moment. What's the rank on that? He asked, leaning in theatrically to peer at the strip of cloth over her heart. Sergeant what now? Staff Sergeant, she replied. Rios. Staff Sergeant Rios, he repeated, testing the words. Big title. They put you in charge of the coffee machine for this trip? Or just the optics? A couple of the nearby operators chuckled, more out of reflex than malice. She let the joke hang there, breathing once, twice. Then she offered a small, mild, almost smile that didn't reach her eyes. As long as it hits what it's supposed to, sir, she said, I don't think anyone will complain. Harrigan grinned, satisfied with his own cleverness. Fair enough. Just make sure you don't shoot my truck. That's my best side up there. He jerked a thumb at the gun truck's turret. Wouldn't dream of it, she said. He moved on, slapping shoulders, trading jabs with his team. She went back to what she'd been doing. Her kit checks were quiet, but obsessive. She laid the rifle along the tailgate of the intel truck, zipped open the case, and worked from muzzle to buttstock. She checked the crown, brushed away a fleck of frost, confirmed the torque on the scope mounts, flicked the magnification ring, watching the reticle sharpen and blur against the hangar in the distance. She clicked through elevation and windage turrets, counting under her breath, returning them to 0. Then she pulled out the folded satellite image and spread it beside the rifle. The pass looked narrower in monochrome, the road a pale thread, the ridges around it darker smudges. She traced the switchbacks with a gloved fingertip, then the lines of shadow that marked steep walls. There, a shallow drainage cut running up from the outside of one hairpin turn, fading into rough scree higher up. It wasn't on the map from the briefing. It was just a difference in tone, a thin, dark line where snowmelt had carved a path during warmer months. She measured it against the contour lines, muttered numbers. Altitude gained, angle from the road, line of sight to the likely choke point. Problem, Sergeant? Someone asked near her shoulder. One of the Allied soldiers, a corporal from the host nation's army, was hoisting a crate into the intel vehicle. His English was accented but clear. Just looking at the ground, she said. Does this path look recent to you? She tapped the faint line on the satellite photo. He frowned, leaned in. Rockfall, maybe. We had some slides last month. Heavy snow. A slide that neat? She asked. He shrugged. Mountain does what it wants. She wasn't convinced. As she packed the map away, other details nagged at her. The report of shepherds and their flocks changing routes. The absence of fresh footprints reported by the last patrol in some villages that should have been busy even in the cold. Patterns of movement that, to her, felt too clean. She tried once to bring it up. Sir, she said, catching the captain as he exited the tent. On the sat imagery, the rockfall near the pass, do we have confirmation of when that happened? It changes the way the road sits. Creates a natural choke. We've got the dates on the imagery, he said. It's in the packet. I saw that, she replied calmly. I just don't like how perfect the choke looks. With no air overhead. If someone wanted to... We're on a timeline, Sergeant. He cut in, pulling his watch cuff back. If we're late, we lose the window at the site. The last patrol ran that pass with no issues. You'll have top cover from the gun truck. It's a milk run. Appreciate the concern. He moved on before she could finish. She watched him go for a moment, expression flat. Then she exhaled slowly, the cloud of her breath vanishing into the morning. From the manila folder tucked under a nearby clipboard, a single sheet of paper slid half out, caught by a stray gust. A younger operator, one of the newer guys assigned as a driver, snatched it before it hit the mud. His gaze snagged on the black blocks covering most of it. Who's this? He murmured, scanning the top line. Then the citations below, redacted into almost solid bars of ink. The supervisor plucked it from his fingers. Need to know, that's who, he said. File that where it was, and don't spill coffee on it. Command had to fight to get her attached. The young operator glanced once at Maya, then back at the blocked-out commendations. Before he could say anything, someone shouted his name from across the yard, and he hurried away. Maya pretended she hadn't noticed. Her hand, though, went unconsciously to the small piece of metal threaded through the sling of her rifle. It was a dog tag, edges worn, the stamped letters rubbed soft by years of thumbprints. It wasn't hers. Different name, different blood type. She rolled it once between her fingers, feeling the bite of the cold metal, then let it fall back against the sling. There'd been another road, another convoy, another morning. Order she'd followed then. A vantage she hadn't taken because it wasn't in the plan. The sound of that explosion still woke her some nights. The convoy rolled out at dawn. Snow along the road shoulders was packed and dirty near the base, but as they climbed, it turned clean and deep. Pines thickened, frost-coated branches in delicate white lace. The mountains hemmed them in, their slopes rising steeply on either side of the road, the sky diminishing into a bright strip overhead. Maya rode in the back of the second vehicle, near a slit window that gave her a narrow view of the world outside. She kept the rifle close, barrel down, scope caps on. Her notebook was open on her knee, a pen looped through her fingers. Radio chatter was light. Check-ins with the local forces at the edges of their sector. A brief exchange with a checkpoint commander who sounded half asleep. Then just the rumble of engines and the occasional crackle of someone telling a joke to break the monotony. Up ahead, in the gun truck, Harrigan's voice drifted over the net. If anyone asks, we're a humanitarian mission, he said, delivering emergency hot cocoa to the oppressed masses. Keep your marshmallows at the ready. A few laughs responded. Looks pretty oppressed to me, another operator said. Snow's a war crime. Maya didn't laugh. She tilted her head, looking past the glass. The valley they were entering was beautiful in that indifferent way only mountains could be. The snow lay deep and unmarked in places, covering boulders, softening jagged lines. In others, it had slid away, exposing dark rock and scrub that clawed through the white. The road narrowed as they approached the pass, hugging the cliff, the drop on the outside growing steeper. She watched the spaces where the snow and rock met, searching for things that didn't belong. A shadow that was too square. A patch of white that didn't quite match the rest. The way the wind moved over the surface. On a distant ridge, a small strip of cloth tied to a dead tree fluttered weakly, red against the white. A simple wind flag to anyone who didn't think too hard about why it was there. She thought hard. Headwind, she noted. 10, maybe 12 knots. Enough to shift her holds if she were shooting from above. Beautiful country, the host nation corporal said beside her, following her gaze. In summer, there are flowers. Families come here to picnic. Maya nodded, eyes narrowing at the sharp bend ahead where the road disappeared around a wall of rock. You ever see that rockfall before? She asked. He frowned. Yes, last month, after the snows, is why the road is narrower now. Why your big truck nearly did not fit. She hummed non-committally and scribbled a note in her book. Rockfall that conveniently narrowed the road right at the point where they'd lose most of their maneuver space, with high walls on both sides and multiple terraces above. On the net, Harrigan's voice came again, too casual for her liking. Hey, Staff Sergeant Coffee, he drawled. You still awake back there? Some of the guys in the back laughed. Maya brought the radio to her lips. Still here, she said. You see any scenic overwatches we should stop at for a selfie? He asked. Maybe one where the lighting hits my good side? Her gaze tracked up the slope, over the drainage cut she'd traced on the map, toward a small shelf halfway to the ridge crest. A spot where someone with a rifle could see a lot of road. And farther up still, an outcropping that, from this angle, seemed to hang out over the valley like the prow of a ship. No selfies today, she replied. Road's too tight. Eyes up. Feels like a funnel coming up. Relax, Harrigan said. If anyone wanted to hit this road, they'd have done it before. Last patrol walked it clean, remember? She didn't bother answering. She adjusted the focus on her scope, even though she wasn't using it yet. Muscle memory. Her fingers brushed the dog tag again. It was cold enough that the metal burned. On the edge of the pass, just before the road funneled into that narrow slot between rock walls, she lifted the rifle, cradled it across her chest, and looked up one last time at the ridgeline. The small red wind flag snapped in a stronger gust. Something inside her tightened. She couldn't prove anything. Not yet. But every instinct she owned, every scar she carried, told her the valley ahead wasn't empty. She slid the bolt back an inch, saw brass gleam in the chamber, and let it ride forward again. When they crossed into the pass, the world shrank to hard, cold stone on one side, open air on the other, and a strip of icy road between. 7 minutes later, the trap that had been waiting there sprang shut. Back in the kill zone, red smoke bloomed and thickened, painting the cold air in swirling clouds. Mark scene, the calm voice said in Mason's ear. Stand by to move on my call. Gun truck, report status. A different voice answered, breathless. Gun truck's got a new driver on the stick, Sierra 3. Gunner's down. I'm taking the gun. Weapon's hot, but she's overheating. Short bursts, then, Sierra 3 said. You don't need to kill the mountain. Just make it duck. Razor 2, move those casualties now. Mason started crawling before she finished the sentence, boots and knees skittering on the slick surface. The corpsman was already working on one of the wounded, hands moving with automatic precision despite the barrage. The man's parka was open, pale skin exposed to the freezing air as the medic pressed gauze and wrapped bandages, his own breath coming in sharp, white bursts. On 3, Mason grunted, hooking his arms under the casualty's shoulders. You got his legs? I got him, go, the corpsman panted. They hauled as a burst of incoming fire shredded the snow where the man had been lying seconds earlier, spraying them with ice and dirt. Mason's shoulder screamed. His breath burned. 2 more up there, someone shouted behind them. We can't get. Focus on the nearest, Sierra 3 said, words like clipped ice. You don't save anyone by getting shot 3 steps out. An enemy rifle cracked from the right-hand ridge. Before Mason could duck, another, sharper shot answered from above. The enemy muzzle flash winked out mid-burst. He could feel it now. The pattern. She wasn't just shooting targets of opportunity. She was deciding in real time which threats mattered enough to spend a bullet on. He reached the lee of the Intel truck's armored side, just as another explosion rocked the pass. This one farther up, a mortar or RPG hitting a patch of empty road. The blast wave slammed into the vehicle and shuddered through the bones. Jam source is 60 meters above the left ridge, behind a rock outcrop, Sierra 3 said. But I don't have an angle from here. I'm working on it. Working on it. Harrigan's voice, somewhere in a mix, sounded a lot less amused now. Who the hell are you, Sierra 3? Your best chance of not dying, she said without heat. Hold what you've got. When I say push, you push. Then the channel crackled as another gust of interference washed over it, drowning her out. Mason pressed his back to the cold armor of the Intel truck, heart hammering, the wounded man's breath rasping against his shoulder. He looked up, past the smoke and the drifting snow. Through a gap in the red haze, he saw the ridgeline again. High up, tiny against the rock in the sky, a single figure lay prone on a narrow ledge. Rifle extended, body still. He couldn't see her face. He didn't know her story, or why her file had black bars where everyone else's had words. All he knew was that whenever that rifle cracked, the valley changed. Whoever had asked her rank this morning had not understood what they were really asking. She spoke again, voice thinner now as the interference surged back, but still there. Razor elements, Sierra 3 said. This is your only warning. I'm moving. When I come back on this net, you're going to follow my orders like they came from God himself. Because by then, I'll be the only one who can see everything. Mason found himself nodding, even though she couldn't see him. Far above, in the snow and the wind, Staff Sergeant Maya Rios shifted her weight, braced one gloved hand against cold stone, and began to climb toward a place no one had ever told her she was allowed to go.